Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to today's webinar. The topic today is 2019 recap and what conveyancers can expect in 2020. And I'm delighted to be joined by Andrew Crawshaw of Groundsure today, who's going to run us through the webinar. I'm sure Andy's probably tweaked some of the slides since he last ran this in January to cater for today's sort of conditions. Before we start the webinar, before I hand over to Andy, I'd just like to draw your attention to the Zoom software where you should have a Q&A button or to be able to ask a question as we go through the webinar. So please use that if you have any questions, because obviously you can hear us, but we can't hear you. Now, we'll try and answer those either as we go along. Alternatively, we'll leave those questions till the very end and run through them to make sure that we answer them for everybody. So Andy, if you're there, I'll hand over to you to go through today's webinar.
Thanks, Adam. And yeah, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As Adam mentioned, we're going to look at some of the key moments of 2019 and also look forward to kind of what we can expect from 2020, and hopefully, all being well, we get back to normality at some point, and some of those things should come to fruition anyway. Also, I'm sure many of you are in the same position as I am, and I have my children at home with me, so apologies if you hear any screams, general fighting, or if you can hear "Hey Dougie" in the background. But as I said, I'm sure some of you guys are in the same position anyway. So 2019 was undoubtedly difficult for many stakeholders in the property sector. Construction started to decline, sellers were deterred from placing their properties on the market, and property growth was stifled to less than 1%. However, the general election and a definitive Brexit outcome helped end the year with more clarity over the UK's future. And despite this, property experts remain divided over what we'd see this year, according to a NAEA Property Market survey. A third, 32%, expected housing supply to continue its downward descent, whilst 28% thought supply would increase given the greater clarity. Although more than half of respondents, at 56%, saw house prices remain the same in 2020, a quarter, or just over a quarter at 28%, believed they would fall. Mark Hayward of Property Mark, the chief executive, commented, "The changing political landscape throughout 2019 has undoubtedly caused uncertainty in the housing market, which in turn has affected sentiment and decision making. Once the current political impasse is resolved and it's clear how and when we'll leave the EU, we hope there will be a degree of certainty which may trigger a flurry of activity." Having a look at HS2, and we've had quite a bit more clarity at the start of this year, but there are many in the industry asking questions of the future of HS2. So having a look and to highlight just the up-to-date news on the project, I thought it'd be quite useful to have a look at. And just to give you an idea of how large and important the project is to the construction industry, it is the biggest infrastructure project in Europe, and it's expected to create 30,000 construction jobs and 2,000 apprenticeships. Despite the costs, some of the UK's biggest construction firms, including Balfour Beatty, Skanska, Morgan Sindall, Costain, Mace and Sir Robert McAlpine, they cranked up the pressure on the government and were among firms that wrote a letter to the Prime Minister. They warned that cancelling the project would cause irreparable damage to the industry and would cost thousands of jobs. Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, claimed it would not be acceptable if the North of England portion was delayed or downgraded, suggesting that the region would once again be abandoned financially. In August last year, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps launched an independent review into HS2 with the aim of aiding the government to make a go or no-go decision by December. The review was to consider HS2 affordability, deliverability, benefits, scope and phasing. The basic idea was to call in fresh eyes, bring some balance and ask the questions which for too long simply haven't been asked. The Prime Minister has been clear that transport infrastructure has the potential to drive economic growth, redistribute opportunity and support towns and cities across the UK, said Shapps. But that investment must be subject to continuous assessment of the costs and the benefits. Finally, HS2 would be subject to the same cost-benefit scrutiny and robust challenge as any other major infrastructure project. At least that was the idea. But in November of 2019, aspects of the report were leaked, including the recommendation that HS2 should go ahead, whilst essentially saying to hell with the costs. Members of the review panel also told the BBC that HS2 should be built in full, with only relatively minor alterations. Some of these including reducing the number of trains per hour from 18 to 14, which is in line with other high-speed networks around the world. It has come to light that all of the high-speed railways in the world, not a single one has managed to run as many trains per hour as we were expecting. The Japanese high-speed train, more commonly known as the bullet train, and France's TGV top the world rankings at 14 per hour. The review looks likely and did actually accept that HS2 has been over-optimistic, and they cut the number of trains to 14, a reduction which undermines the business case for the whole project. Whilst train speeds of 400 kilometres per hour are possible, although not in tunnels, of which the HS2 southern section will have many, as demonstrated by China and the Fuxinghao, the engineering required is vastly more complicated than ones that run at 360 or 320 kilometers per hour. Even the very advanced Japanese bullet trains cannot continuously run at 360 kilometers per hour due to issues with noise pollution, where to overload wires, and braking distances. One of the easiest ways to keep costs down would be to run HS2 trains at 300 to 320 kilometers per hour, which is 186 to 200 miles per hour, which is the same as the French TGVs. These trains can simply be bought off the shelf without the need for a bespoke solution as set out in the government tender. Once again, though, we hear plans to reduce the speed of trains from 250 to 210 miles per hour have been removed from that review. Another whitewash and another blow to the supposed benefits of this project. Even as the official budget creeps ever nearer to £100 billion, the chair of the review, Douglas Oakview, has chosen to go over old arguments rather than ask if the project really represents any good value to taxpayers. This review seemed to have taken an approach of accepting the project will go ahead, acknowledging the crippling issues, but simply looking for new ways to justify them. And then in London, in an alternative universe, the locals are getting the tube directly from Woolwich to Heathrow Terminal 5 in less than an hour. That is how long it will take on the Elizabeth line, according to Crossrail's Journey Planner tool, handily placed on the chronically delayed infrastructure projects website. If we step back to reality, however, and that tool, though very much real, is incongruous. After years of hitches, budget overruns and managerial changes, Crossrail remains nothing more than an abstract concept below the pavement for most people, more than a decade after it was signed off. It was previously reported the line would not open until after the autumn last year. However, recent reports have suggested the opening will be delayed until 2021 as costs increase, as a further £650,000 is actually needed to finish the scheme. A new plan to complete the outstanding works and bring the Elizabeth line into passenger service as early as possible has been developed by the new Crossrail leadership team. This provides Londoners with a realistic and achievable plan to complete the Elizabeth line. Crossrail Limited will need further time to complete software development for the signalling and train systems and the safety approvals process for the railway. The trial running phase will begin at the earliest opportunity in 2020. This will be followed by testing of the operational railway to ensure it is safe and reliable. The latest assessment is that opening of the central section will not occur in 2020, which was the first part of our previously declared opening window. The Elizabeth line will open as soon as practically possible in 2021. An update will be provided to Londoners with further certainty about when the Elizabeth line will open as early as possible next year. And the government has called a halt to shale gas extraction in 2019, or fracking, amid fears about earthquakes. And This is an indefinite suspension, and it comes after a report by the Oil and Gas Authority, or the OGA. They said it was not possible to predict the probability or size of tremors caused by the practice. It was suspended at the end of August 2019 after activity by Quadrilla Resources, who are the only company licensed to carry out the process, at its Preston New Road site in Lancashire, caused a magnitude 2.9 earthquake. The Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy said that after the OGA concluded that further seismic activity could not be ruled out, further consents for fracking will not be granted unless the industry can reliably predict and control tremors that are linked to the process. However, Quadrilla have said that it would provide the oil and gas regulator with new data to address those concerns of communities near active fracking sites, so the suspension of its operations can be lifted. The government said ministers would not approve any new fracking permits after a report found that it was impossible to accurately predict the severity of any future seismic activity. The Business and Energy Secretary, Andrea Leadsom, said the moratorium was based on current scientific information and that it would remain in place until compelling new evidence is provided to allay any concerns. The thing with fracking is there's so much money to be made in the process. Over in America, it contributes about $80 billion every year. So it's hard to see anything other than the moratorium being lifted at some stage in the future. And then last November, which it seems a world away now with everything that's gone on, but insurance payouts to people hit by the floods that we saw in November in the Yorkshire and the Midlands are expected to reach £110 million, according to initial estimates from the Association of British Insurers. Insurers have already made initial emergency payments of over £1.2 million to help flooded homeowners and businesses in the immediate aftermath of the flooding. In addition, at least £680,000 has so far been paid in rehousing the worst hit flood victims in alternative temporary accommodation, where their homes have become uninhabitable. Initial ABI estimates show that so far just over 4,000 claims have been received. 2,250 of these are related to flooded homes and businesses, 1,788 to damaged vehicles. Of the estimated £110 million payouts, £45 million covers damaged homes and possessions, £58 million for business property and stock, with £7.5 million relating to damaged vehicles. The average household flood claim is likely to be around £31,000 and £70,000 for a flooded business. This compares to the average claim across all insured risks of £2,200 under a home insurance policy and an average claim of £11,500 for a commercial policy. Now, we use information provided by Ambiental Risk Analytics, and this shows a few areas that flooded in those November 2019 floods and just how their data would have predicted these scenarios. So in terms of what we could see from 2020, and obviously a lot of that's changed. With what we're going through at the moment, and we've had the 2020 budget, which has been thrown into not turmoil, but obviously again changes are going to have to be made. We've got a launch of a new compliance board that I'll let you know about. There's stamp duty reforms that were planned for this year, more assistance for first-time buyers, and also reservation agreements and looking at those as well. And hopefully, as I said, if everything gets back to normal, then we should see those come to fruition later this year. Now, the budget was delivered on the 11th of March, and here are some of the highlights that will affect us in the industry. In terms of infrastructure, the government is investing record amounts in Britain's roads, railways, broadband, housing and research. Over the next 5 years, the public sector will invest £640 billion. And by the end of the Parliament, net investment will be triple the average over the last 40 years in real terms. There'll be £27 billion between now and 2025 to improve vital transport routes. £2.5 billion will be spent on fixing potholes and £12.2 billion to build more affordable homes. In terms of green priorities, flood defence investment of a record £5.2 billion over 6 years will better protect 336,000 properties. £39 million in the Environment Agency's network of water supply and water navigation assets. £533 million to extend plug-in grant schemes for ultra-low emission vehicles to 2023. They will establish carbon capture and storage in 2 sites to capture CO2 emissions before they are released into the atmosphere. There'll be £640 million a Nature for Climate Fund to plant more than 40 million trees and restore 35,000 hectares of peatland in England, and £300 million additional funding to improve air quality. For housing, there's a £10.9 billion increase in housing investment to support the commitment to build at least 1 million new homes by the end of the Parliament, and an average of 300,000 homes a year by the mid-20s, which is quite an optimistic number, but we'll see how we go, because we are in desperate need of that amount of houses every year, and for it to actually come true from the government. So where were we before we had the thing that I won't mention? The industry was absolutely booming, and I'm sure everybody saw that for the first couple of months, for January, February, and the first couple of weeks in March as well. The Halifax say that house prices rose at their fastest pace in the 3 months before February 2020 since 2015. Nationwide, the average house price increased by 2.3% year on year in February, which was the highest growth rate we'd had in 18 months. The average listing price of London-based property rose by 5.1% in the 12 months leading up to February 2020. That was from Rightmove. And in January and February, the number of properties coming onto the market in London increased by 31%, according to Chesterton's. Now, as Britain enters the most serious phase yet in its fight to tackle the crisis that we see, the traditional spring selling season in the housing market has been all but forgotten. The government's crisis measures to limit the spread of COVID-19 mean estate agents, prospective buyers and surveyors are barred from making home visits, bringing the home buying process very largely to a halt across the UK. Richard Donnell, research director at the property website Zoopla, says the big slowdown is likely to come in May and June, when he predicts an 80% drop in transactions, a far steeper decline than was seen after the financial crisis. He said that transactions will drop below the worst of 2008 because we physically stopped the market. Overall, he forecasts a 50% year-on-year drop in housing transactions over the whole of 2020, assuming a mid-year lifting of the restrictions. Before the government announced the lockdown last month, half, or just about half, at 49% of those planning to buy decided to stop looking for a new home as a result of what we're seeing at the moment. Few sellers pulled the plug, with just 20% deciding to halt proceedings on the sale of their home. And despite the scale of the disruption, 1 in 6 homeowners, 16%, are thinking about remortgaging in the near term. Trussell's research found that on average, customers who remortgage to avoid lapsing onto their lender's standard variable rate could save on average £344 per month, or £4,128 a year. MFS UK have a slightly rosier outlook, and I'd recommend looking at Market Finance Solutions to have a look at the paper that they've just produced, as they've collated information from Savills, Jones Lang LaSalle, and Really Moving, where Savills say that there will be a 15.3% 5-year compound growth for UK residential property. They also say a 4% 5-year compound growth for London residential property. JLL say that London and Manchester are to register house price growth of 17.1% between 2020 and 2025. And Really Moving predict that house prices for England and Wales are to increase by 5.9% in the 3 months leading to June this year. Now, looking at the stamp duty reform, there are 2 schools of thought when it comes to stamp duty reform. The first option would be to abolish stamp duty outright, and there is certainly some precedent for it. When stamp duty on transactions up to £300,000 was abolished back in November 2017, it helped save first-time buyers an estimated £400 million in the 12 months since the legislative change came into force. The second option, and generally preferred, is to reduce stamp duty. An analysis released in August from buying agency Ludgrove estimated that a 36% cut to stamp duty across the board would produce a 40% increase in transactions. This in turn would generate 1.44 billion in tax revenue and 8.36 billion in business revenue. As Ludgrove Chief Executive Fraser Slater clearly puts it, our analysis demonstrates the effect of what economists describe as the Laffer curve, namely that tax cuts can generate more tax revenue and, equally importantly, more economic activity upon which taxation itself depends. Savills released their own analysis shortly after, cautioning that any cuts to stamp duty would lead to a fall in tax revenue that would have to be recouped through other taxes. But in echoing the corroborative analysis, argues that the right balance of stamp duty cuts could catalyse transaction while keeping costs to the exchequer to a minimum. Stamp duty brings in billions each year for the UK economy. £135 billion between fiscal year 2000-2001 to 2017-18, which was over £7 billion each year. Most recently, an October report from the Centre for Policy Studies levied the criticism that stamp duty is a heavy tax on mobilisation, with their modelling showing that either abolishing stamp duty entirely or drastically cutting the levy, raising its minimum threshold to £500,000 and reducing other rates would result in a surge of new house building and transactions across the market. But the report also argues against abolishing the tax entirely. The report instead advocates reducing the tax to 4% on properties up to £1 million and a 5% tax on anything higher, placing the estimated total cost of cuts at £1.6 billion after accounting for dynamic factors, namely the rise in transactions that would result. In theory, this should work out as cost neutral, as higher transactions would generate higher stamp duty revenue. Though we all hate hearing it, Brexit has for a couple of years now been blocking growth in the industry, and people have been getting tired of waiting, hence the small rise in sales. With an end in sight, and with patience very much coming to an end, chances are that they will respond overwhelmingly positive to any break that allows them to buy and sell with confidence. So perhaps, instead of concerning themselves with a short-term view of filling the exchequer coffers, the government should be actioning legislation that reduces the tax burden on buyers as a tactic to actively encourage growth in the housing market. The resulting surge in transactions could bring a net gain that is both sustainable and long-term for all parties involved. Now, just to let you know some personal news here at Groundsure, and on January 6th this year, we announced the acquisition of Mining Searches UK, which is the country's leading specialist in historical mining risk. The combined businesses will have a compelling and broad product set with geo-environmental experts and geospatial data scientists providing advice and information products across the spectrum of geo-environmental risks. In February 2019, we both launched a new official Con29M coal mining search, bringing a fresh new look to the coal mining search reports. And our Senior Vice President at Groundsure said, "I am delighted to announce this acquisition. Paul and the Mining Search UK team have been brilliant collaboration partners, and our teams have been working together for 2 years now. The natural next step was to bring the businesses together, to continue to build on the foundations already established, and to continue working towards delivering innovative new products to meet the demands of tomorrow's property market." Now, another one of our sister companies, Glenigan, they fall under our essential umbrella. They have been collecting and collating planning data for over 40 years. Their 2020 forecast explains how a cooling UK housing market has held back sector activity during 2019. But as we've mentioned, greater political clarity is expected to lift home buyers' confidence this year, and it's something that we saw in the first couple of months of the year, and hopefully we'll see again towards the end of it. It supported a modest rise in property transactions and new housing activity over the next 2 years. In the private housing sector, there is still a strong potential development pipeline. There's renewed growth in the build-to-rent developments, improvised consumer confidence that lifts property transactions and house prices this year, and the extension of the Help to Buy supports new house sales and new sites developments. Property transactions and house price inflation have slowed since the start of 2017, and conditions remain weak in the wider housing market. Nationwide, Building Society puts annual house price inflation at just 0.4% in October. Residential property transactions are expected to decline, or they were expected to decline by 2% this year to their lowest level since 2013. Quieter conditions in the wider housing market have dampened sales of new homes, prompting developers to focus their sales efforts on existing sites and to open fewer new ones. Looking ahead, a clear political outlook is expected to improve buyer confidence this year, as we've seen, and also in 2021, despite that weak economic growth. A modest rise in household earnings, improved purchaser confidence, and the extension of the Help to Buy scheme until 2023 were expected to lift the value of project starts from 2020. Now, for all you frequent drivers out there, there was a BBC Panorama study that showed an increase in near misses on the M25 from 72 to 1,485 in 5 years. A poll by the AA showed that only 9% of drivers felt safe on smart motorways, and the Transport Secretary told the BBC that if they aren't as safe or not safer, we wouldn't have them at all. Therefore, the Department for Transport have done a review into the scheme with some recommendations that have come out quite recently. The death toll on stretches of smart or managed motorways reached 38 in the last 5 years, including many in accidents that motoring organisations believe were avoidable after breakdowns. Smart motorways bring extra capacity on congested motorways, but many motorists report feeling unsafe, with far more breakdowns ending up with cars trapped in live lanes of fast-moving traffic. On Glenigan, on their site, simply doing a keyword search of smart motorway brings up roughly £13.1 billion worth of projects. These are big projects, and any change to plans would significantly dent the infrastructure sector. Towards the end of 2019 and into the beginning of 2020, the government announced an 18-point plan to tackle the safety of smart motorways. Some of the measures include speeding up the deployment of stopped vehicle detection technology to cover the network within the next 3 years, allowing problems to be spotted within 20 seconds and lanes to be closed more quickly. Faster attendance by More Highways England traffic officer patrol on smart motorways, reducing the distance between places to stop in an emergency to 3/4 of a mile where feasible and to a maximum of 1 mile. Building 10 more emergency areas on the M25 where there has been a higher rate of breakdown. Making emergency areas more visible with a bright orange surface and better signed. A £5 million campaign to increase public awareness and knowledge of smart motorways, and also the automatic detection of and enforcement action against drivers ignoring the red cross sign in closed lanes. Now, reservation agreements, as you know, the practice of buyers and sometimes sellers paying a fee to show their commitment to buying a property prior to exchange, are having their moment in the spotlight as the government is on the cusp of launching its official trial. Very soon, it will ask selected estate agents to implement them and to report back on the results. 1 in 3 of property deals fall through even after an offer is made, but the industry has seen highs of as much as 49% of transactions falling through. Not only do fall-throughs cause excess stress for all involved, each one can cost upwards of £2,000. Mark Pryor, Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government Lead Officer on House Buying Reform, recently told Conveyancers that his ministry research on the subject of fall-throughs suggested that between 25 and 33% of all house purchases collapse mid-deal each year, costing consumers some £270 million in wasted fees. 66% of sellers and 70% of buyers were specifically worried that the sale would not make it to completion after they'd accepted an offer. And 50% of buyers and 70% of sellers indicated they would be willing to enter into some kind of binding legal commitment after an offer was accepted. Pryor said the government was working with the industry to develop what he called a short standardised reservation agreement, which can be used in any transaction. There are numerous firms which have been implementing reservation agreements as standard, and the results speak for themselves. One firm has found that when the buyer has committed to an upfront fee, which for their clients comes off the final price of the property, they are significantly more likely to proceed through to completion. Serious buyers accept that this is part of our process and seldom question it. And vendors, many being experienced investors, like the comfort blanket that a reservation agreement provides. Their experience is that reservation agreements can also speed up the transaction process. The industry average sits somewhere between 14 and 20 weeks, which can obviously be improved on. Some firms have introduced these themselves and have seen the process drop to 9 weeks. So hopefully something to speed up everything involved in the transaction process. Now, back in 2019, we at Groundsure announced that we would be ending our membership with COPSO and the Property Codes Compliance Board. Our membership has now concluded. We at Groundsure share a belief that for the future of property data, due diligence lies in the application of technology to big data, more robust data standards, transparency and openness around data integrity, and working with the wider industry to deliver the solutions of the future. As a result, and with our other founding members, we launched the Conveyancing Information Executive. All CIE members will adhere to the Conveyancing Information Executive standards, replacing the search code as regulatory guide. The Property Ombudsman will administer the consumer redress mechanism to Conveyancing Information Executive standards in just the same way as it has done historically for the search code. And also, here at Groundsure, we are a full consultancy service. I always like to let you guys know that on the bottom of every one of our environmental reports is our direct telephone number. If your clients ever have a question about one of our reports, they can call us directly and speak to an environmental consultant who'll run through the report with them. Saves you getting involved in a load of environmental matters that you don't necessarily want to get involved in. We can offer you in-house and online training, any client care letters to show how important environmental reports are, product cards or sample reports to show exactly what's included in them, and any bespoke content or consultancy expertise is at your fingertips if you just get in touch with us or go through the guys at InfoTrack who can answer any questions that you guys might have. That's everything from me. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you all stay very safe and well, and I'll pass you back to Adam.
Thanks, Andy. Andy, there is one question here, and might need to pick this up offline, but in transactions frozen from March to May, should a percentage reduction be introduced into a renegotiation, bearing in mind potential reduction in prices in short term of 3 to 7% from a buyer's seller's point of view?
So a reduction in the transaction, the actual cost of the
same, yes.
I mean, I think that's some sort of moral ground we're standing on, isn't it? I think from a buyer's point of view, they'll absolutely try and do that. From a seller's point of view, I would have thought they'd want to stick to their guns and have the transaction exactly as it was. Again, I think that's by a transaction basis, and it depends how much of a fall in house prices we see because of the situation we're in. But yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it?
It is. I think it's going to be very different for many different people. Unfortunately, I don't think I'd like to answer that question either. No, I don't. Ian, what I'll do is maybe I'll try and give you a shout to make sure that I've understood that correctly, but that's the only question we had. So with that in mind, thank you, Andy, for your time today. Oh, hang on, sorry, another one here. Searches carried out are meant to have a limited life from when they are carried out. Will these be extended or updated, Andy?
So what we have done is we've actually, I don't know if you've seen it, Adam, we've got a plan in place for you guys and a few others specifically, where if there is a need to buy a purchase report, a subsequent report, we always put a 6 months lifespan on it. But if you do need to, for any transactions that have happened or aren't going through at the minute and will be picked up after we get through this, then we will do the reports at cost for you. So £10 plus VAT.
Thank you for that, Andy. That's good. That answers that question. All right, well, that's the only question. So thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Andy, for running today's session. I hope you all have a good day today. Otherwise, I will leave it there and close out the webinar from there. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.